Okay, Shalom Aleichem, Erev Tov. Welcome back to Shiviti of Portland at Congregation Beit Yosef. Thank you again so much for having me here, and God willing, I look forward to seeing you in a week from tonight for a shiur and selichot in person. Tonight, I wanted to introduce you to a letter that I think is very important. It's a very important letter to read in this time period of the year, particularly because we are now in these days leading up to Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippurim. Last week we spoke about Teshuvah. What ends up happening for the most part is that we attend all kinds of lectures or all kinds of speakers come around, like myself, teaching people about Teshuvah, to do Teshuvah, to get close to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and so on and so forth. But the methods, or the way in which they tell us to get close to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, very often are harmful to the people who are hearing those messages. People will try to scare people straight. There was a show about young juveniles that were getting in trouble with the law, and they would send them to prison to scare them straight. That was the whole fear. Prison is such a terrible place that it should scare anybody that such a thing exists in a civilized country. But in that show, there are people that think that's the method of education. What's the best way to educate people? Scare them. You want to get someone to keep Shabbat? Don't show them the beauty of Shabbat. Yeah, I do. Is you terrify them. You convince them that if you don't keep Shabbat, you know what's going to happen to you. You're going to come back in a reincarnation and boiling feces and who knows, all kinds of things people are going to tell them, and they terrify them to make sure they keep Shabbat. Oh, you don't eat kosher. You know what's going to happen. You're going to be eaten by a fire-breathing dragon. I don't know what they're going to tell them, but all kinds of horrendous things, telling them to do Teshuvah in a way that is scary. There was a Chacham who lived in North Africa. His name was Rabbi Yosef Mesas. Rabbi Yosef Mesas, also pronounced Mashash. I'm not actually clear. I've heard both ways. Rabbi Yosef Mesas is a relative of Rabbi Shalom Mesas, who was the younger cousin, but the chief rabbi of Yerushalayim. Rabbi Yosef Mesas was the chief rabbi of Tlemcen in Algeria. He was born in Morocco to his father, Rabbi Chaim Mesas. Rabbi Chaim Mesas passed away when Rabbi Yosef was quite young. Ultimately, Rabbi Yosef moves from Morocco to Algeria. You should know in general, we talk a lot about North Africa and different places in the world, and that last time I was teaching a class about the Jews in Eastern Europe, and the borders that you and I know of as borders of countries, not only did they sometimes change, but for the Jews, they were quite fluid. The Jew in North Africa, that nation spread across all of North Africa. Of course, there were Moroccans and Algerians and Tunisians, but at the end of the day, they were part of one continuous stretch of Jewish community that was in that region of the world. And it's not unusual that rabbis in Algeria would come from Morocco and vice versa. That was something that we find quite often. It happens to be that at that particular time in history, in Tlemcen, Algeria, the Jewish community was struggling a little bit with their Judaism. If you're familiar a little with the history of the Jews in Africa, you have the French that come through and essentially liberate the Jews in the sense of giving them equal rights. Equal rights usually meant the assimilation of Jews into society in a way that wasn't always conducive to growth in Torah and mitzvot, if I had to say it honestly. Rabbi Yosef Mesas has a famous letter in which he says, when the French came to North Africa, one who describes this event as a good one is correct, and one who describes this event as a bad one is also correct. Good happen and bad happen. Good happen in terms of equal rights. Good happen in terms of technology and education and wisdom and a certain modernization of North Africa. That also, though, brought in its wake some negative things. And those negative things required very unique minds to deal with. We find that sometimes in other Jewish communities, when the Jewish community started drifting away, those that were observant of Torah and mitzvot, they decided to abandon their brothers and sisters who were less observant than them. In North Africa, the Chachamim there were quite particular in making sure, Shalom Lechem to the Rabbanit, the Chachamim of North Africa were quite particular in making sure the Jewish people didn't leave Judaism, no matter what it was. No matter what the cost was, we want Jews to be in part of the Jewish community. It doesn't matter how. Let's keep them in as much as we can. And this letter is written in that context. Rabbi Yosef Mesas is the rabbi in Tlemcen, Algeria. From Tlemcen, Algeria, he comes maybe back to Morocco, I don't recall, but ultimately finds himself as the chief rabbi of Haifa. appointed by none other than David Ben Gurion. And he lives in Haifa, he dies in Haifa, his grave is not far from the beach in Haifa. And Rabbi Yosef Masas is one of my favorite rabbis, not just from North Africa, but in general, in the whole world, a unique personality. Him and my rabbi's father, Rabbi Yosef Peretz, alav shalom, were very good friends. In fact, in the book Nachalat Avot of Rabbi Yosef Masas on Perkei Avot, there's a poem written to him by my rabbi's father. למעלת רב נבחר ונכבד מאוד נעלה. To the honorable rabbi of great fame and reputation, and there are many titles that Sephardic rabbis give each other when they write each other letters. כבוד מורנו הרב אברהם, I don't know if the last name is Chalewa or another variation of that name. שלום רב למעלתו לכל ביתו. I'm sending you, Rabbi Avraham, blessings for you and your whole family. Hashem yarich yimehem ushnotehem. May God increase your life and your days. Michtav kevodo kibalti b'moado. I received your letter that you sent me. When you sent it. Ve'otzem hatirdot hatziburiyot va'yichidot. He said, and now, unfortunately, because of my pressure, my delay was caused because of all kinds of things in my personal and professional life. V'ner nosaf ha'avarat hadira, that's a mistake. Mi'akom mi'akom, gadru ba'adi mehashiv ma'alato davar b'ito. And because I also had to move apartments recently, I had to move from one place to another place, I did not have the time to respond to your letter in a timely fashion. I sometimes feel that way. People send me a message and I either respond within 3 seconds or within 3 years. But usually there's very little in the middle between those two things. Sometimes life gets in the way of responding to people who reach out to us. And I've stolen some of my time. That's not really mine, but I've stolen it to answer out of respect. And I'm writing very briefly. And it's good for a chacham to just understand from a little bit a lot. I'm going to hint and you're going to take the message. This Rabbi Avraham had written either a book or a letter that he sent to Rabbi Yosef Masas. And in this whole pamphlet of sorts, he was writing all kinds of terrifying things. What's going to happen to a person in the afterlife? What's going to happen to that person according to Kabbalah? What's going to happen to that person? You do averot like this, do averot like that. This will happen to your soul. This will happen to your body. This will happen to eternal whatever. And he wrote a very frightening letter. And the whole purpose of it was to help the younger generation stay Jewish. These young Jews that came now are not observing halakha properly, and he wanted Rabbi Yosef Masas's approval. Karati michtavo. I read your letter. And it's full of terrifying ideas. And you're calling out for all types of suffering. All kinds of terrifying things about people who act in improper ways. And this approach on how to teach people. Shum tova, lo gashmit velo ruchanit. It's not enough, and for those of you in the source, I'm on page 3, source 3. It's not enough that these ideas are not going to motivate anybody, not physically, not spiritually. Nothing good will come out of it. Lehefech, to the contrary. Tasim mu'aka b'chol evarei ha'adam, v'lachatz gadol belev, v'irbuv machshavot. It's going to make a person's body terrified. It's going to make a tremendous anxiety in their hearts, and it will confuse their mind to hear these ideas. These ideas that you teach people could cause them to lose their sanity. You can cause a person to have a nervous breakdown. It's terrifying what you're telling people. And this person could end up hurting themselves or others. It's already happened before. And therefore the proper path. Just like King David said in his Tehillim, I'll walk innocently in my home. You see, you're dealing with a generation in which the parents were observant of Torah mitzvot. The parents went to the synagogue, the parents kept kasher, the parents observed the holidays, the parents were the parents. And they came perhaps to Israel, for example, and they find that their children are no longer observant of halakha. But this happened in all of my family. Both those who came from Morocco and those who came from Yemen. Generation one of my grandparents were very observant people. They were rabbis, they were Talmidei Chamim, they went to pray in the synagogue regularly. Generation two was under so much pressure by the Israeli street to assimilate, to become more modern, to become more open-minded, to stop being so primitive and backwards and religious. And now inside of your home, you keep kasher, you keep Shabbat, you're doing all these things, but what about your children? So you should be more like David HaMelech. Walk innocently in your home. What does it mean? אך בזאת האדם במסגרת ביתו תהיה דעתו מעורבת עם הבריות. You should spend time with the people in a way that you are involved with them. Don't allow the members of your household to drag you into ways or behaviors that are not appropriate. But treat all the people that you know, even those that don't observe halakha properly, with kindness and derech eretz, with proper etiquette and manners. Lakdim lehem shalom. Say hello first. Ulkabel et kulam besever panim yafot, and greet everybody with a smiling face. Kamo shekatuv al Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, like it says about Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai in the Talmud Masechet Berachot, page 17. שלא הקדימו אדם שלום מעולם, אפילו גוי בשוק. That nobody ever managed to say hello to Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai before he said hello to them. He was always the first person to greet everybody in the street. He said even a non-Jewish person who was in the market, meaning it's the person that he had nothing to do with, a random person on the street, he always greeted them first. Everybody. I can tell you a story. I was once in Shuk Machane Yehuda. I was once in the Shuk in Jerusalem. There's a big market. I was walking with my students. It was a Thursday or a Friday, I don't remember. I was walking with a group of my students. All of a sudden, someone grabs me from behind. And there are all kinds of things that happen in Jerusalem that you're not ever sure, like, is it a good thing or a bad thing? And maybe somebody who knows me, it's a little weird to greet me that way, but they grab me, and all of a sudden, I hear someone speaking to me Hebrew in an Arabic accent. And here I recognize I'm right now being hugged or grabbed by an Arab in Jerusalem, in the shuk. And I'm not sure what's happening, but all of a sudden he says, Ata achla gever, you're a great guy. And I turn around, I don't recognize this guy. I said, I'm sorry, do we know each other? Of course we know each other. I said, I don't think I know you. He tells me, you live on, and he told me my address in the old city of Jerusalem. Okay, the guy clearly knows me. Now I have to figure out why an Arab gentleman in the shuk knows my address and where I live. And I said, can you please refresh my memory? So I used to live on a street called Plugata Kotel Street, in an apartment that I couldn't afford, but I was there anyways thanks to a dear friend of mine. And I was in that apartment, and underneath the apartment there was a public bathroom, like a restroom that tour groups just stop by and all of that. And he said, every morning you go to pray your prayers, shacharit. He said, you wear your tefillin and your talit and you walk in the street, then every morning you say good morning to me. Every morning you say good morning to me. He said, you know how many years I'm working in that bathroom and nobody says good morning to me? You stopped every morning and said good morning to me. I have to tell you that he remembered that. I was grateful, because I'll tell you, the reason I didn't remember him is not because I intended to be rude. I say good morning to everybody who walks by me. I have a hard time in New York where you greet people and they, do I know you? What do you want? There's a hard personality for me. I go to some places, people are nice. You walk into the store, hello, how are you? How can I help you? Nice people. I make it a point everywhere I go to say Shalom Aleichem first. Hello, how are you? Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. What does it hurt to be a nice person? Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai, even the idol worshiper in the market couldn't say hello to him before he greeted them first. Says Rabbi Yosef Masas, that's how you should treat everybody in your family, even the people that are behaving not in the will of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. ומחוק דרך ארץ שקדמה לתורה, היה מקדים להם שלום. Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai recognized that before he was a Torah scholar, he had to follow the laws of derech eretz, of proper behavior. And he said hello to them. וקל וחומר לישראל יהיה מה שיהיה. How much more so to a Jew? It doesn't matter what kind of Jew he is. Dati or Chiloni, an observant Jew or a non-observant Jew. Listen, these words, Dati and Chiloni, are complicated, but he's using them colloquially because that's what people say. You see a non-observant Jew, also be nice. V'im raite adam Yisrael oseh mitzvah, tismach bo meod meod. And if you see a Jewish person doing a mitzvah, you have to be incredibly happy with him. Once upon a time, I was a rabbi in a Beit Knesset that was not this one. And it was a long time ago. And they brought a rabbi to come speak, and the rabbi came to speak. And he spoke to an audience of about 80, 90 people. He says, you people, you don't keep Shabbat. You don't eat kasher. You come here to pray, you wear tefillin. God hates your prayers. God hates your tefillin. You're going to go straight to hell. Screaming at them, cursing at them. I always thought it was such a weak-minded individual. Who are you screaming at? What Jews are you screaming at? None of the bad people in the street you're not screaming at. You're screaming at the Jewish people who are so good. Yeah, they don't eat kosher, they don't keep Shabbat, and they still come to the Beit Knesset. And they still put on tefillin. And they still try to come do kiddush. And they care about their Judaism. Those are the Jews you want to beat up? It's not fair. It's picking on our most vulnerable population. Says Rabbi Yosef Masas, you see a Jewish person, any Jewish person, doing any mitzvah, don't criticize him. Be extremely happy with him. Ki ze alfei shanim, it's thousands of years. V'anachnu negonim begalut mara v'achzarit u'me'orevet ta'arovet gedola. We have been scattered in this bitter exile, and we are spread and mixed, musubachim betoch tocham shel umot ha'olam, and we are mixed together with the nations of the world, b'chol min melacha u'mischar, in every one of our professions. Doesn't matter which job you have, you're working somewhere in the world that isn't only Jewish. Uv'chol min chokhmah u'mada, in all of our wisdoms and sciences and education and university and it's high school, doesn't matter where you're studying. Everything that we do is involved with the non-Jewish world. V'chol limudenu rak bevatei sifrehem, and we study in their schools. It's very interesting that Rabbi Yosef says that. V'chol tinok v'tinoket kshematchilim lepatpet rak bilshonam. When the Jewish kids start to speak, they're not speaking Hebrew. They're speaking whatever language. It's English, it's French, it's whatever language we are, where we are. They speak their language, not our language. And we have no weapons with which to fight with him and show him the truth of our Torah. We have no way to show him the prophecy of our prophets or the wisdom of our sages. Everything is dependent on their faith. Like King David said, all of your mitzvot are emunah. And that's what our rabbis of blessed memory said. If you look at the top of page 3, Habakkuk comes and says there's only one principle left in the Jewish people. The Jewish people are going to live by their faith. Ve'emunah en ba shum koach lilachem ba limshoch al yada shum adam ladat. There is no way for emunah to pull a person to the faith of Torah. Rak lemí shenolad v'nitgadel al birkei haTorah v'mitzvot. Only the person who was raised on the knees of Torah and mitzvot. She'im yishgeh אתה מעוררו ומראהו משוגתו מאיזה פסוק בתנ"ך או מאיזה מאמר בש"ס או במדרש או מאיזה סעיף בשולחן ערוך ואז אחד ליבו ושב ורפאנו. What can we do? We see Jews, they're not behaving properly. We try to teach them for a little bit of halakha, a little bit of Torah, a little bit of Mishnah, whatever it is that we can, some Midrashim, some Talmud. But for the most part, the Jewish people are good. What happened to them? They've been in exile for 2,000 years. Your average Jew that you're upset about, they're not affiliated, they're going to this school, they're going to that. What choice do they have? It's hard to be Jewish. It's not easy. The world hasn't made it easy for people to observe Torah mitzvot. Look at how much compassion the chief rabbi has for Jewish people that are struggling with their Judaism. but מי שנולד ונתגדל על ברכי רפי כוח בתורה ומצוות, somebody was raised on the knees of people who weren't so strong in their observance of mitzvot. אף נולד לצדיקים וחסידים. Or maybe he was. Maybe this person was born in the house of righteous people. ונכנס לבתי ספר של אחת מעמי התבל. But where were they educated? In a public school. In the local school system that exists in the world. קשה מאוד עליו אמונתו לאט לאט. עד אשר מעט מעט יגרשנו מתוך ליבו כליל. It's so hard to have emunah in the world today. It's so hard to believe in HaKadosh Baruch Hu in the school system out there. It's so hard to have the right values that your parents may have taught you at home, but to embody them in front of a world that constantly taunts you for them, that makes fun of you for them, that doesn't understand why you have them, it's difficult. והרי הוא כתינוק הנשבע לבן הגויים, שאין עליו שום אשמה על כל חטא ועוון שיעשה. The Rambam has a classic case of a Jewish person who as a baby was kidnapped by a non-Jewish army that attacked a Jewish village. And that child grows up thinking he's from Moab, he's from Ammon, or he thinks he's a Canaanite. Who knows what he thinks he is? Is that child guilty of doing avirot? Of course not. He doesn't know any better. He was kidnapped as a young boy. She was taken as a young girl. Says Rabbi Yosef Masas, most of the Jews in the Jewish community today don't know any better. You're upset at them, you're angry at them, you want to give them musar, but they don't know anything. It's not their fault. Even if their parents were good people, righteous people, but they couldn't stand up to the whole world. And if you still see someone Jewish like that, who's doing any mitzvah, that's an incredibly novel idea. And you should be rejoicing in their mitzvot, not criticizing their mitzvot. And it's possible and if you help this person do a mitzvah, how many times did people do full teshuvah because they started with one mitzvah? And that one mitzvah took them to the next mitzvah, to the next mitzvah, to the next mitzvah, and then they did teshuvah. ואם ראית אותו עובר עבירה, תהיה מה שתהיה. And if you see a person violating an עבירה, it doesn't matter which עבירה. אל תשנאהו ואל תזניחהו חס ושלום. Don't hate him. Don't abandon him. Heaven forbid. כי צריך לדעת, you should know, שבטבע האדם בעל חומר אחו, וגם רק לחטוא. And he says, listen, people are made out of physical bodies, and they struggle with the Yetzer Hara. I'm going to skip some of the proof texts that he mentions here. They're not relevant to us. I'm going down 2 lines above the bold letters that are there. Our physical bodies, they're designated to sin. They have no choice. That's what they are. They're animals. ובפרט עם תוספת התערבות בגויים ולימוד בספריהם. And now, especially in a society where we live together, and we're mixed together, and we're educated together, and our values are influenced by each other, what do you expect the young Jewish mind to think? What do you expect the next generation of Jewish people to behave like? ובכן, and therefore, מחויבים מאוד למד זכות על ישראל בכל דבר ודבר. It's our obligation to judge the Jewish people favorably about everything. ומי שאינו מלמד זכות, and the one who decides not to judge the Jewish people favorably, עונשו חמור מאוד מאוד. His sin is very grave. כנודע מאליהו וישעיה. Like it's known from Eliyahu and Yeshaya, who were not willing to judge the Jewish people favorably. והגאון רבי שלמה בן דינן, and one of the great giants of Morocco, Rabbi Shlomo ben Dinan, alav hashalom, nida tzurba merabanan. He excommunicated a rabbi from the Jewish community. Al she'amar al Yehudei Tzorfat ra'im v'chataim. Because he said the Jews of France are sinners and bad people. He excommunicated the rabbi for giving that sermon. Now, what was the reason the rabbi gave a sermon? Why would a rabbi say the Jews of France are sinners and they're bad people? Why would he do that?
I can speculate, but I noticed something very interesting about what you just said. There is a clear difference between idealization and judging somebody favorably. In other words, judging somebody idealization is the polar opposite of, for lack of a better term, demonization, meaning like calling everybody, putting everybody that fits in a certain category under a certain umbrella. You could be either demonizing them or idealizing them. And neither of those things is judging somebody favorably. So I would venture to guess that the answer to your question has something to do with the culture that people have assimilated into their mindset rather than following Torah.
Okay, let me just say it in even simpler layperson words, Matatiel. You're sitting in Morocco. Your cousins moved to France. All of a sudden you hear, wow, they're not keeping Shabbat. They're not eating kosher food. Their kids are going to non-Jewish school. The rabbi gets up and he's trying to save these Moroccan Jews from their cousins in France. Oh, those Jews in France, they're sinners, they're bad people. He's trying to motivate them in some way, either the ones in France to do Teshuvah, or he's trying to get the Jews in Morocco to stay religious. And what does Rabbi Shlomo ben Dinan do? He excommunicates him. He wasn't lying. He wasn't telling you this something wrong. So why does he excommunicate him? It's not the way to speak about our brothers and sisters. Somebody who went there and they fell in the temptations of the world because that's what's their choice? What is their choice? You know, there are stories here in America of Jews who they came over from Eastern Europe and they came to this country and they had to work. And in this country, a long time ago, you know, immigrants, the world didn't look like it looked like today. People today get off on Friday afternoon, they get off Saturdays, they get off Sundays, national holidays, Jewish holidays, paid time off, all kinds of benefits people have. Back then, you were Jewish, you came to work here, you worked in some factory, in some sweatshop, in some job, some menial labor job. And all of a sudden, you want to take off Shabbat. You tell the manager, listen, I'm going home for Shabbat. The manager says, it's fine, you can go home for Shabbat, but don't bother coming back on Sunday. We're firing you. And there were certain Jewish people that every single Shabbat, there are books about them. You know, all the Jewish publishing houses have written books about these people. Every Shabbat, they came home because they lost their job, and Sunday they started looking for another job. And you find fascinating things. There were two groups of Jews that came out of the kids of these people. There were those that loved Shabbat, and they when they took the opportunity to keep Shabbat, they kept Shabbat, and there were those who hated Shabbat. And it had a lot to do with the attitude of their parents. Their parents would come home, I hate Shabbat, I lost my job, it's God, Judaism, my life is so miserable, so difficult. The whole Shabbat, they're complaining. They don't know where they're going to get money from on Sunday, where they're going to get food from on Monday. And that creates a child who's resentful. Your religiosity destroyed my life. We don't recognize how hard it is for some people to do the things they need to do. It's hard to be Jewish sometimes. Maybe things that are easy for us are not so easy for other people. We're so nice for us to keep kashrut, but other people don't have the money that we have to buy the food that they buy. It's so easy to send your kids to a Jewish school. Maybe some people can't afford it. Maybe the Jewish school doesn't want my kid and there's only one option. Maybe the Jewish school is there, but there's something wrong with it. Maybe. There are problems in the world that to just throw everybody out and call them bad people is not fair. There's a lot for me to talk about, says Rabbi Yosef Masas, but there's no reason to belabor this point. V'gam betoch beto. Especially inside of a person's house. Yizaher ha'adam shlo yarbeh alehem. Don't make Judaism too difficult on them. Dikdukim, v'akpadot, all kinds of stringencies, all kinds of chumrot. People have all these fantasies about how Judaism is supposed to look and every detail and this one and that one, and they force their religion on their children. It's not about Shabbat or Kashrut, it's about, you know, on Shabbat you can't even walk because with your shoes they make static electricity on the floor and that. All kinds of crazy things people do. And then what happens to children? They hate it. Shabbat is a burden. This is the prophet. V'karat ala Shabbat onek. You call Shabbat a day of rejoicing. For some people, Shabbat is a miserable day. It's a miserable day. Ki bazeh yaharos shlom beto. You're going to ruin the peace in your home, in your marriage from this. V'imarer et chayav, and your life will become bitter. Ve'ikar chayei ha'adam hi hasimcha. And the main purpose of one's life is to be happy. How can you be happy when you're destroying your life? You're destroying your marriage. You're destroying your children. He said, I have a lot more to say. Yesh ma la'arich harbe b'zeh. I have a lot more to write. Omnam en li zman klal. I don't have time though. Af lechol o af lishon. I don't have time to eat. I don't have time to sleep. Hamakom bechazdo yiten lachem velanu ometz. Ubriut la'amod al mishmeret hakodesh. Amen. HaKadosh Baruch Hu give us strength and health to stand for what is right and what is holy. And he signs his name at the top of the next page, page 4. B'chvod Rav, with a lot of respect, Eved Hashem Yosef Masas. And then he has a PS. Top right of page 4. PS says the following. V'hizaher me'od. And you should be very careful. Midimyonot kozevot. From all kinds of wild imaginations. Afim timtza otam ktuvim al kama sfarim. Even if you find that some of the books, and here he's taking a jab at some of the books on Teshuvah, particularly those of the Kabbalists, even if you find that some of those books, some wild thoughts about what's going to happen in the next world. Shekol mechabrehem hayu gam hem ba'alei dimayon. Because the authors of those books, they also had wild imaginations. Hashem yishmochem v'yishmarenu amen. Hashem should save you, and Hashem should save us. Hashem should save all of us from all that is written in those books. You see, Rabbi Yosef Masas is telling you, there are some ideas that are terrifying. And those terrifying ideas, they have sources. I could also show you the source of which reincarnation you're going to come back in if you did this or you did that. I could tell you where it says which fire you're going to be burning in, which angels are going to be chasing after you, and which next world they're going to fling you like a catapult from one side to the other. I know where all those things are written in the books. Rabbi Yosef Masas says, what's the point? The point is to do Teshuvah, because if you're trying to motivate people to do what's right, that's a miserable way to motivate people to do what's right. I mean, if that's your goal, if your goal is I want to get Jewish people to want to be Jewish, then terrifying them is not the right way to do that. It doesn't matter that it's written in a book. If your goal is to scare people and cause them anxiety, maybe depression, cause them to have suicidal thoughts, you want them to think that God hates them, that's a great plan. You want to get people to hate themselves? You chose the right books. And what about that? But it's written in a book. It's written in a book. It's wild imaginations. And the authors who wrote those books also have wild imaginations. Don't have to be scared. And what are we dealing with? The question is, don't argue with success. That's the statement that we've always heard. Don't argue with success. Has it ever succeeded to scare people straight? You tell me, yeah, sure. Look, you can get people to commit to keeping Shabbat. Tell me what it looks like 10 years later. Tell me what their children look like. Tell me. Because if you think it's a success story, it's not. There's no way. And all of this is based on a Rambam that we read last week. How much greater is Teshuvah that comes out of love than Teshuvah that comes out of fear. There's a quality in a person returning to the Creator because they want to return to the Creator, because they want to be in love with the Creator, than people who are scared. And because of that, they're running to the Creator to save them from their imagination. You know, I had 2 more sources I wanted to read to you tonight. I just don't want to keep you here longer than I can. I could be done by the end of this. Was it okay with you if I read 2 more sources?
Wait.
Okay, let's do it. See, the real question that comes back to, so what about the Kabbalists? I mean, they wrote these books. The Kabbalists told us all about the Teshuvah and rolling over in the snow and fasting for 84 days in a row and hitting your back and suffering. They wrote about all this. They're written in the books. So what, are you denying all of that? What do you think? Is that important? Let me read to you the Rambam, who's clearly not a Kabbalist. But I want to finish with a Kabbalist, perhaps the greatest of them in the last couple of generations. And that is Rabbi Yosef Chaim of Baghdad, the Ben Ish Chai. Let me read to you 2 pieces, and this will end. Here's what the Rambam writes in the 2nd chapter of the Laws of Teshuvah. The Rambam says the following. Umahi ha-teshuvah. What is teshuvah? You told me I have to do teshuvah. Rosh Hashanah is around the corner. Yom Kippurim is coming up. What does it actually mean to do teshuvah? Here's the legal answer. What is teshuvah? Hu shi'azov hachoteh cheto. It's that a person who did a sin, they committed a wrongdoing, stops doing it. V'yasiro mimachshavto, and you should remove it from your thoughts. V'gmor belibo, and he should decide in his heart, shelo ya'asehu od, I will never do it again. So 3 steps. Stop doing it, stop thinking about it, agree, commit to never doing it again. By the way, thinking too much about teshuvah is also part of the sin. The more involved you are in doing teshuvah for something, the less you've abandoned or let go of a wrongdoing that you've done. The more you deal with it is actually, ironically, the more you're involved in it. You keep rehashing, keep replaying it in your mind. That's also not healthy. Part of it, says the Rambam, leave it behind you and make a commitment never do it again. And you should regret that you did something wrong. Do you know the word nachem is about regret? Nicham. The name nechama, nachman. We think that the word nechama means comfort. Correct? That's usually the way Jews translate the word nechama. But the word nechama is used by the Creator as regret, remorse. And we tell a person, I'm offering you my regrets, my deepest regrets. And therefore that word led into, that must mean comfort. I'm offering you my comfort. Yeah, but initially the word nechama means regret. I'm sorry that this happened to you. Not I'm comforting you. It's important to know the evolution of that word. And you should take witness to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, who knows the secrets, that he will not repeat this avera again. And the final step, you have to do vidui. With your mouth, you have to say the things you did wrong. HaKadosh Baruch Hu, this is the avera that I did. HaKadosh Baruch Hu, I'm never going to do it again. HaKadosh Baruch Hu, I don't want to think about it at all. Say it, verbalize it, because verbalizing something makes it real. The act of vidui, of confession in front of the Creator of the universe with words, is one of the most important steps of teshuvah. How can one do teshuvah if they're not willing to own up to what they did wrong with their words? So that's teshuvah. Now, is it realistic for people to do teshuvah according to the Rambam? Is that a hard thing to do? Well, it might depend on the avirah, right? Some people might like their avirot more than others, but it's not so hard. The process isn't so hard. Meaning, it's very clear, it's very straightforward. And here enters the Ben Ish Chai. This quote that I'm bringing to you from the Ben Ish Chai is from a book of his called Maim Chaim. And it's all about teshuvah. It's many, many pieces of very Kabbalistic work. But as I was going through it, I found this piece which really is maybe answers the concerns in some people's heart. What about the Kabbalists? Let me tell you what the Kabbalists say. From the Kabbalists, not from me. Source number 5. Vim haged hu gan lecha. And if it was told to you, O be'enecha ra'ita, with your eyes you saw b'kitvei Rabbeinu ha'Arizal, in the writings of our Rabbi the Arizal, Rabbi Yitzchak Luria Ashkenazi. Zechuto yagen alenu, amen. May his memory protect us. Tikunei avonot b'sigufim v'taniyot harbe. All kinds of things that you must go through, sufferings and asceticism that you have to go through, and fasting in order to do teshuvah for your averot. I used to live in Jerusalem. You might get a kick out of this story, actually. Listen to this story. I used to live in Jerusalem in a small little dinky apartment in a basement. It was cut into 2 by the owner. And so my doorway and the other guy's doorway, it used to be part of the same apartment, but now it was 2 apartments, and he could rent it to both of us at the same price that he rented 1 apartment. And one day, that guy next to me disappeared. And for a few days he was missing, and then he finally came back, and I said, "Where were you?" He said, "I got arrested, I was put into booking." I said, "What did he do?" I said, it was a little crazy. He would study with some group of Kabbalists in the old city of Jerusalem, and one of the things they studied about was in order to do Teshuvah, you have to get undressed and roll around naked in the snow until your body's freezing and you're in pain and you're suffering. And so he heard that it was snowing up north in Israel, in the Hermon. And that's up in the border. You guys know where the Hermon is? It's our border. And he decided to go take a bus up there. And he got up there and he took off all his clothes. And now he's rolling over in the snow. And then it was nighttime, so nobody was going to see him. But what ended up happening was, that's the border of Israel. So he ended up tripping the security fence that brought a whole unit of Israeli soldiers out to his location. And they come guns blazing, whatever they got. And they're like in snow gear. There's a special unit of soldiers up in the Hermon. And they've got guns pointed at him, and there are flashlights and spotlights. And he's completely naked in the snow, rolling over on the ground. And he got arrested for public indecency and for all kinds of other things, for being in a military area he shouldn't have been in, then possibly touching the border fence. I don't know. They held him for a while till they realized probably he was crazy, and they sent him back to Yerushalayim. So now I got to live next door to him again. But he read a book, and the book said that if you want to do Teshuvah, you got to roll over naked in the snow. That's what he read in the book. It says the Ben Ish Chai, you read these things and you get scared. Because you don't have the mind for this. And it's a great story. This story, if I wasn't there, I wouldn't believe it. Don't reject Teshuvah. באומרך and say, כיוון שאתה יכול לעשות את התיקון, אם כן תקשה עורפך עוד. כי אין לך תקנה, מה תועלת אם תשוב לאדוני ותאמר לו, עוויתי, פשעתי, חטאתי. If you can't do all of these Kabbalistic things, then what's the point of Teshuvah? Because I can never fix my sin with all these tikkunim of the Kabbalists. Don't give up on Teshuvah because you don't do these things. Al na achi tomar ken, my brother, don't say that, says the Ben Ish Chai. Ve'al ta'aleh al libcha shemetz ma min hadevarim elu. Don't even think anything like that. Ki elu divrei shtut, because your logic is stupid. It's incorrect. Yan ki ikar teshuvah hamuskemet. There is a legal definition of Teshuvah, and that Teshuvah is the Rambam. כפי רבותינו זיכרונם לברכה מן האדם הראשון ועד עתה, from the first man until today. והוא מה שכתב הרמב"ם זיכרונו לברכה. And that's what Rabbeinu Harambam wrote. What the Rambam wrote is Teshuvah, says the Ben Ish Chai. That is the law. There is nothing else from that. והיינו עזיבת החטא, וידוי וחרטה. Abandoning the sin, confessing your sin, and then feeling remorse. שלושה אלה הם העיקרים. Those are the main components of Teshuvah. חזקים קריים מוצק, אמיתיים ונכונים. יתד היא שלא תמות, ממנה לא תזוע. This definition of Teshuvah will never change. It doesn't matter who's going to come along and add to it. This is the way to do Teshuvah. ועושה אותם, and if a person does Teshuvah like this, אפילו מי רשע גמור שעבר על כל התורה כולה, בכל אות ואות שבה, even if the person is so wicked that they violated every letter of the Torah, אם עזב חטאיו ונתוודה עליהם, if a person leaves the way of sin and he is confessed them, וגם נתחרט ואמר, אוי לי מה עשיתי, and he regrets, what did I do with my life? How could I have done those things? אילו הייתי יודע כך, לא הייתי עושה כך, if I would have known that the Torah didn't let me do this, I would not have done it. בכל ליבו, he says that with all his heart, הרי הוא ראוי ומקובל לפני השם יתברך, איש צדיק, he is fitting and worthy and treated by a Kadosh Baruch Hu, by God, as a righteous person. כי זהו העיקר. That's the main part of Teshuvah. hu hatafshil. That's the main food. וכל הסיגופים והתניות הם התבלין הצריכים לתבשיל. And all of these extra Kabbalistic things are like spices that you add to your food. But the food is the Teshuvah of the Rambam. Matityahu, you and I once spoke about Kabbalists. And sometimes I think that people who are not fluent with the writings of the Mekubalim don't recognize that even the greatest of the Mekubalim, and you could argue as to whether those ideas should be taught or not taught or where they come from, they had a tremendous amount of respect for the oral law and for the Rambam and for the Shulchan Aruch and for the codes as they were written, even though the Ben Ish Chai said, listen, I am a Kabbalist, but he recognized, listen, the Rambam is the law. I'm not going to argue with that. The Rambam is the main dish. The Kabbalistic stuff is the spices you add to it. It's like the toppings on your ice cream. Nobody goes just to eat toppings. But you're going to go get that. Once you have the ice cream, who cares if you have toppings or you don't have toppings? The respect here towards the Chachamim is incredible, and it goes both ways. You see it both ways. I think sometimes we internalize theological disputes and we don't recognize that in practicality, our Chachamim knew how to balance their feelings about these things. And let me end off with the last section. Let's say you know that fasting is going to be bad for you. So there's an avera, I don't want to tell you which avera. The Kabbalists say you have to fast, each time you did that avera, you have to fast for 84 days in a row. You eat at night, like the Muslims do by Ramadan. You eat during the day, you fast during the day, but you eat at night. But you know that fasting like that is going to hurt you. En zemin Hashem nesakenet atzmo. That's not what HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants, that you should make yourself suffer. I'm just finishing up my Portland class, so come on, grab a chair, but I'll be with you in a second. מאחר שכבר עשה את השלושה הנזכרים לאל באמת ובתמים, מלב ונפש, מבלי שום פנייה וערמה חס ושלום, because a person already did Teshuvah. So you didn't roll over in the snow. So you didn't go beat yourself in front of a bedin. So you didn't fast 84 days in a row. It doesn't matter, but you did authentic Teshuvah. And you know you can't handle those things. הרי זה פתיר ועתיר, this person is exempt from everything. ורצוי ומקובל לפני השם יתברך בתכלית. And this person is wanted and desired by the Creator. כי הוא מלך אב ורחמן מוחל וסולח, because HaKadosh Baruch Hu is a compassionate God who loves us and forgives us. ואל תחשוב, and don't think for a moment, כי זה הדבר הוא חוץ מהסכמת איש אלוהים קדוש רבנו הארי זכותו יגן עלינו. Don't think that I'm saying something contrary to the teachings of the Arizal. Meaning, even if you're a Kabbalist, says the Ben Ish Chai, don't think I'm arguing with him. אלא אדרבה, איהו גופה מסכים על זה. The Arizal, if he was here, would have said the same exact thing. והם אמרו, והם אמרו. And there's what the halakha says, what the Mekubalim say, but everyone agrees that what's written in the halakha is what's written in the halakha. And you don't have to worry, says the Ben Ish Chai, about what's written by the Arizal, because the Arizal himself would agree with this concept. And so let me summarize, Cheva and Portland, let me summarize what we said today. If you want to read people scary things from books, you can. It's possible. And what will it accomplish? People will be scared. You'll have accomplished the goal of scaring people. I had a rabbi come here once, and he spoke about reincarnations, and this person once died in a car accident because of an averah they did, and then they got reincarnated in somebody else. What was the point of that whole story? If it was to scare everybody or to spook out the kids in the room, great job. Mission accomplished. But if the point was to cause people to change their ways, to cause people to do teshuvah, if the purpose was to cause people to act in a better fashion, so you accomplished nothing. And there's, what are you trying to do? What is the goal? Because we all have the same goal. The Prophet says there will come a day where the hearts of the parents and the children will return to each other. We'll all walk in the ways of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That's what we're hoping for. And you see that there's a generation that is not receptive to being tormented, to being tortured, to being criticized, to being beaten up. So then why are we still using that method in educating the Jewish people? Rabbi Yosef Masas told us, if you see a generation, you see a Jewish person today doing any mitzvot, be proud of them. Be happy with them. Motivate, encourage them for the mitzvot that they are doing. Then stop criticizing the mitzvot they're not doing. Because it's not a method that's going to work. We're very lucky to have a community like Kehillat Beit Yosef, where in the Kehillah, especially in the last month since I've been there's been a conscious shift that I've recognized to encourage people, to recognize what they do contribute, to empower the people in the Kehillah to behave in a proper fashion, but to recognize that we're all a family and we're all in this together. And the results from what I hear at Beit Yosef have been incredible. And B'ezrat Hashem Yitbarach, exactly 1 week from tonight, I'm going to be in Portland. I'll be with you for a shiur. We're going to study together, and then we're going to say slichot together. And then I'm going to get back on an airplane to San Diego, but you're going to continue into high holiday season of Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippurim and Sukkot in the spirit of our Chachamim, which told us that always, always push people away with your left hand and bring them close with your right hand. We'd rather everyone in the Beit Knesset, even though they're imperfect, than have them all outside of the Beit Knesset because they're not perfect. That's the goal, that's the vision, that's the dream. And B'ezrat Hashem, I hope that this high holidays, with that philosophy in mind, there won't be an empty chair in Beit Yosef. You guys will have to file for an expansion onto the park over there, or take away the parking lot, or add more chairs. B'ezrat Hashem, but until then, thank you so much for learning with me tonight.